Dr. Laurie Santos is a professor of psychology and head of Silliman College at Yale University. And I saw that she teaches a course on happiness, which is the most popular course in the 300-year history of Yale.
Really?
No, really.
Really? No, really? Really? No, really? Really?
I always say my wife wakes up with bluebirds over her head, and I wake up with an anvil over my head. I had 3 generations of unhappy. And by the way, you couldn't tell my grandfather if he was unhappy because he always had a face his entire life as if he ate bad pie. So I guess he was happy at weddings, at whatever, but he looked the same. So I don't know even how you gauge happiness, but boy, are we in need of hearing how your lesson works. And by the way, how unhappy are the kids that waited in line and couldn't get in your class?
But also, just as a beginner, how did you get drawn to this subject? How did you become someone who could stand up and actually not only speak to it, but teach about it?
Yeah, well, it really started by seeing kind of how bad my students were having things, right? I mean, these days, nationally, students are reporting more depression and anxiety than they ever have in generations, right? I mean, nationally right now, more than 40% of students say they're too depressed to function most days. Over 60% say that they feel overwhelmingly anxious, and more than 1 in 10 has seriously considered suicide in the last year, right? This was what I was seeing on the ground. And when I saw that, I was like, man, we educators have to do something. We can't pretend that students are just kind of getting through college when the stats are that bad. And so I kind of did like I'm a psychologist by training, so I did this sort of retraining in this field that's known as positive psychology, right? Like how can you kind of experience life with a little bit more flourishing? And so I said, yeah, I'll just, slap together this new class. I thought it's a new class on campus, so 30 kids or so would take it. You can imagine my surprise when I walked into a quarter of the entire Yale student body who was like trying to get into this room.
Amazing.
To take the class. We taught the class in a concert hall because that was the only spot other than the stadium where we could fit everyone who wanted to take the class. And so, yeah, that was the story. It was just seeing the need like on college campuses to realize like students are struggling and we got to give them some like real strategies they can use to feel better.
And so is that the overview of the course? Can you give us a sort of, encapsulated overview of what the course is all about?
Yeah, no SATs, no Yale tuition, just 2 minutes on the podcast. Totally. No, so I mean, I think the course starts with the premise that we get happiness wrong. All of us are seeking out happiness. All of us are putting work into it, but we're kind of going about it the wrong way. We're seeking out money and fame and all these things we assume are going to bring us happiness. But in practice, if you look at happy people, that's not what they're going for. Happy people are changing their behaviors. They're trying to get more social. They're changing their mindsets. Like they're doing the things that really matter for happiness. And the idea is if we can all just kind of shift our misconceptions a bit, if we can focus on the stuff that really matters for happiness, we'll all start feeling a lot better.
Is this part of the positive psychology movement in neuroscience? And I guess it was Martin Seligman that tried to find if there was a way to actually enact happiness in people. And
Peter, have you taken the course already?
No.
I
just wanted to know.
Exactly. Yeah, this guy, Marty Seligman, who's this very famous psychologist, kind of realized that so many academic psychologists focus on the bad side. We have these courses on abnormal psychology. We focus on depression and so on. But we rarely ask the question, like, what moves us above baseline? Instead of like not being depressed, what can we do to flourish more, to have more purpose and more meaning? And so the whole class was kind of strategies that sort of emerged from that movement. We've got like 30 or 40 years of work in this field of positive psychology that has learned stuff that all of us can do to start feeling better. It's just we don't often tell people what those strategies are.
So what comes up for me too is I wonder when people hear this, if they're in a bad socioeconomic position or have lost a parent or they have cancer, whatever, you go, yeah, this is great, except this is for rich people who can take time, and it's narcissistic, and I've got to deal with making it through the day. I'm sure you have a variety of those students, even at Yale, or that you're teaching online.
Totally, and I think this honestly is one of the misconceptions we have about happiness, right? That what I need to change to feel happier is my circumstances. And it's true, if you're in some like really terrible traumatic circumstances, obviously changing those are going to be better. But I think for a lot of us, it's not actually making more money if we have enough money to put food on our table and a roof over our head. It's not kind of changing our circumstances. What the data shows, if you look out there at happy people, some happy people have pretty crappy circumstances. Right. And there are folks out there that have fantastic circumstances, right? Like every hedonic pleasure you could imagine in life. and they kind of feel like their life doesn't have meaning. They're a little bit complainy and miserable. And so I think we go about it thinking like, oh, I have to fix things before I can focus on my mental health. I got to change my job or change my relationships and so on. And sometimes we can change our behaviors and our mindset in the moment in like really simpler ways that will be way more effective.
Well, you mentioned, people who have a lot, that we would think of making them happy, and yet they don't feel it. Is any part of that sort of like, I'm not savvy about drug use or anything like that, but I'm always told about people would get a certain level of high, and then that dose wouldn't work, and they'd have to. Do people burn out on their own happiness? Are there conditions where they go, no, I'm actually pretty happy, but then that doesn't feel happy anymore, and it's got to be something else?
Yeah, totally. This is something that psychologists refer to as hedonic adaptation, which is just a fancy way of saying you get used to stuff, right? You hit the lottery and you make $1 million. And, for the first couple weeks, that feels great. But then that's just your life. You're just a millionaire, and it comes with all the problems with it. The good news is it happens in the reverse direction, too. Say something terrible happens, like you lose your job, like, week number 1, that feels awful. But then, week number 2, you kind of just get used to it, right? And so this is something we forget when we're planning our future, is that we can kind of adapt to our own happiness. It's like a high that you get from heroin, but it's the high that you get from all good things in life, making some money or having a new relationship. But we forget that when we're planning. And that means as soon as we kind of hit that adaptation, as soon as we get used to stuff, we think like, oh, no, I just need more. I need the next carrot or the next accolade or the next million or whatever. But you're going to get used to that too.
So is this, in talking to you and the fact that this is Harvard and it's 300 years in this course, people are just Yale. I mean, excuse me. Oh, by the way, what
Harvard,
was
Yale.
do we know Yale?
No. Don't poo-poo. My son is a graduate of your school. He would be apoplectic right now. His happiness would be gone.
Google him. Look up what was tuition 300 years ago at Yale. I want to know. And did family members get other people in? But my question about today is, as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. Growing up, and I had mentioned this in one of the other podcasts, my dad never asked me if I'm happy, fulfilled, whatever, is part of this huge number of unhappiness in reporting. The people feel more comfortable reporting it now, number one. And number two, we've had, and I don't know the number of years because it's passed me by pretty quickly, where we stopped doing talk therapy. It used to be when I was growing up, if somebody had a problem, they went to a psychiatrist, psychologist, and they had therapy and whatever. Now it's, you go and the guy or the girl the doctor gives you medication and potentially more medication and keeps you medicated. And you're not really addressing a lot of the underlying issues. It's like weight loss. If you're not addressing the underlying issues and you're doing the weight loss stuff, you may gain the weight back because you haven't done it. Is that all add in to make that number so big today?
I mean, I think we know a little bit about the stigma part, right? And one of the reasons we know that is that unfortunately these numbers have gone up significantly and fast. So that number about depression I was quoting, about more than 40% report being too depressed to function, that number has doubled since 2009, which I don't know about you all, but it feels like 2009 was like yesterday.
Yeah,
look at the music from 2009. It might as well be, what's in the top 40 today, right? And I think that tells us something about stigma. Like the stigma, maybe in the 1950s it was more, stigmatized to talk about depression, and we didn't use words like that. But like, we were using the same concepts in 2009. Like we shouldn't see it doubling in that time, right? And then I think in terms of the treatment stuff, I think part of it is that we forget that there are things that we can change oftentimes in our behavior and our mindset, that do the same work as a lot of these therapies out there. There's some evidence, for example, that, if you just move your body, get a half hour of cardio a day, that can be as effective as like, taking a prescription for, a depression medication or something. Again, not in every case, and there's some important nuance there. But I think that we often forget that these things are in our control to change if we start changing our behaviors and our thought patterns. I mean, this is what a lot of talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy is about, right? It's like change your behavior, change your thought patterns, and you will see some traction. The cool thing is that there's strategies, you don't necessarily have to be in therapy to start employing these practices. You can think about ways you can change those things ahead of time.
So would I be correct in saying, and do you break it down this way, or do you look for treatment or response? I think the average person thinks of happiness as an emotion. But, I was thinking to myself, is happiness emotional or is it chemical? Is it physical? Is it spiritual? It seems like it has many, many components. And I know many people who are struggling with depression and blocks to their happiness that seem to be primarily treating it only chemically.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we could have a very long podcast and even longer class just about the definition of happiness and what goes into it. I mean, I think it's all of the above. But social scientists often define it as having these kind of, two components that are made up of all these parts, right? What one component is the emotional part. It's the answer to the question, how are you feeling today? It's the sum total of your positive emotions minus your negative emotions. And if that ratio is pretty good, if you got, decent amount of joy and laughter to sadness, frustration, and so on, we're probably going to say you're happy. It's not to say you want no negative emotion. I think this is a different misconception. We need negative emotion in our lives. Those are important signals for flourishing. But you want the ratio to be decent. That's kind of part one. That's sort of being happy in your life. But there's also a sense that happiness requires being happy with your life. You got to think your life is going well. And so that's the sort of answer to the question, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life? And I think what social scientists are trying to do is they're trying to maximize both of those. They're trying to maximize, the positive emotion relative to negative emotion that you have in your life and how you think your life is going. And sometimes deficits with those are really, truly chemical deficits. I think this is one of the reasons exercise works, is that it's like, it's changing our body's physiology, right? But sometimes they really can be fixed by changing your thought patterns. There are changes you can make to your thought patterns to get more positive emotion and to kind of feel like your life has more meaning too.
I got to tell you, and I didn't expect this, but I was sitting in bed with my wife the other night watching somebody talk about their situation of depression. And this has never happened to me before. And I started tearing up. And my wife said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I've struggled with that my whole life. I don't talk about it because I don't know how to frame it. Because I'm happy. I should be happy. My circumstance is great. I have great friends. I'm doing stuff. But yet there's a sadness that is inherent when I wake up that I have to work through. And I guess it motivates me. But we just did Howie Mandel. He's not going to mind me saying it. But Howie talked about his depression. And there's so many people out there you would think, why are they depressed? And I can't explain it. But man, it overwhelmed me. And even talking about it now, I thought, hey, this is a comedy podcast and it's smart. We're going to do this. I feel a bit emotional only because it's a burden. But you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to burden other people. And it seems narcissistic. And what is somebody going to say? What is somebody going to say back to you? And what's your friend going to say back? Oh, it's okay. Some perfunctory little, and it's a burden to put on somebody else. But man, it surprised me that in this context, I
think it's one of the reasons so many people, that class really went viral on campus, but it kind of went viral off campus. There were all these news articles about, oh my gosh, this Yale class with thousands of students. And I think it's the same thing. It's like, these are 19-year-old kids who got into Yale, as smart as Jason's, kid. They have everything made, right? How are they depressed and anxious, right? And so I think we forget that, again, our circumstances don't matter. These are issues that all of us face. But with the sadness and the depression, I think, there's one thing to mention, which is, I think we get off track and we assume that, a happy life, a flourishing life has to include no depression at all, right? No sadness at all, no frustration at all. And that's just false, right? A flourishing life requires going after your goals. It requires paying attention to the world around you. And that just means that necessarily you're going to experience some negative emotions. Those emotions are normative, right? They're supposed to be there. Sometimes you're supposed to be pissed or you're supposed to be frustrated. You're supposed to be scared. And I think we also, in our quest for happiness, have to make sure that those moments of sitting in your bed with your wife and experiencing a little sadness at the human condition, that's real. You want that in life. That's an appropriate normative signal. And so I think we have to be careful not to push away all negative emotions, or first of all, we're going to miss the deep parts of human nature and comedy and tragedy and all this stuff, but we're also not going to be able to use those emotions as appropriate signals, right? They're signals. Negative emotions are signals that we should be taking different actions and behaving in different ways.
But some days you're incapacitated and you want to lie. I remember points in my life where I would misrepresent what I was doing or tell people, totally. Oh, I'm out writing with somebody, and I wasn't. I was driving around, and because I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. But I didn't want to come home and face that and say, did you ever go through anything like that, Jay, where you were that down?
I don't, I tend, what distances me sometimes from my own happiness is not so much depression as displaced anxiety, this feeling of something is wrong, or a memory of something that I did or said, or that I felt was shameful to me or hurtful to someone else, and it plays on me. So mine is more fear generated rather than, or anxiety.
Oh, I got that too, though. But I have that. I have the full poo-poo platter.
Yeah. I don't easily get depressed. I get
Which
anxious. I'm the opposite end. But Laurie, to what Peter was talking about, like sharing that with a wife, I feel like most people who have partners, and certainly parents, feel some obligation to be a source of the happiness of their partner or their child. I know I'm very guilty of that, especially with my children. I keep thinking, I will fix it, I will make it better, I will somehow be a beacon that calls you towards your happiness. But that's not real, or do we have some responsibility there, or can someone else make someone else happy on a prolonged way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some responsibility, right? We do affect each other's happiness, but I think we often get that responsibility wrong. I think we assume like, oh, I have to fix things. If it's another person that's feeling sad or depressed or anxious, like our child or something, we might think, oh, I need to fix that, right? I need to figure out how to fix it. And in fact, if you look at what the research shows that you'd probably have more of an impact on that other person's happiness if you focused on your own happiness. If you stopped being anxious about how anxious your kids were, right? Like that's kind of how emotional contagion works. We kind of have to put our own oxygen mask on before we, help other people. But when it comes to worrying about whether or not our own unhappiness, our own anxiety and depression is negatively affecting other people, I think this is a spot where we do get it wrong, especially if we're depressed and we're kind of seeing everything through the kind of, depression glasses, right? We assume like, oh, this is going to be a burden on somebody else. They're not going to want to hear this. It's going to make them feel bad. I'm not worth it. But in practice, like often if you ask someone for help, it makes the other person feel like pretty good. Like people get a real happiness boost from helping others. Right. So by kind of asking for help, you kind of can give that happiness boost to other people. But beyond that, I think we have a misconception about how people will think, especially maybe friends or people we don't know as well as our spouse. We think like, if I complain to them and reveal my mental health issues, they're going to think I'm a total mess, or they're not going to want to hang out with me. But in practice, researchers have looked at this, like what really happens when you disclose this stuff. And they find this effect that they call the beautiful mess effect, that like people around you like it when you disclose your vulnerabilities, even if that includes like some of your mental health issues. It's kind of beautiful to see someone's messiness because you think, oh, that's so cool that they're close enough to me that they shared that. Or, oh, now I actually get to help them, or I get to do something to like kind of make this better. And that will make me, the person who's helping, feel good. And so I think that remembering this beautiful mess effect has helped me when I'm in a bad place of saying like, oh, there's this friend and maybe I don't know them very well, to kind of be really vulnerable about what's happening with me right now. Maybe they don't like me, but actually I'm helping myself and I'm helping that other person. And I'm probably misconstruing like how they're going to feel about it. They're not going to think it's as awkward as I think they're going to think about this situation.
And give them a chance. But I'm sure there's a time limit and a repetitiveness to it. It's like if you're doing it every day, your friends have had enough. Then they feel responsible for your happiness and you fall into a pattern.
I think that's a spot where we need to like think about other hacks that we can use to, some of the stuff we cover.
So give us some, so people listening, because apparently it's broad enough that it's touching a large percentage of people that are tuned in. Totally. Give us some tips. So what are some of the tips that really resonate that you found out in doing the course with your students?
One of the fastest ones is really, using the power that our body has over our minds, right? Like heads connected to bodies, like we forget that. But it means if you can hack your body, you can often hack how you're feeling. We mentioned one way, which is through exercise. But another way is just to ground yourself, especially this is true if you're kind of experiencing what Jason was talked about, but the fear and the anxiety kind of running rampant and the regret running rampant. One way you can kind of stop that in its tracks is just to get into your senses. There's this sort of 5 senses technique where you just stop and say, okay, what are 5 things I see right now? Okay, list them out. 4 things I can hear. 3 things I can touch. 2 things I can taste, and 1 thing I can smell, right? It sounds so stupid, this technique, but as you get into it, like, what, 2 things I can taste? Like, I don't know, my breath, maybe like some crap that's in my teeth from before, but like, you're not worrying about whatever it was anymore, right? You're just grounding yourself in your senses. And, it's silly, but it takes like 5 minutes. And now all of a sudden you just killed that little ruminative cycle in its tracks, which is great. Another stupid one, but like, taps into your high school biology class is taking a deep breath. Like, it sounds so pedantic of like when you're, feeling anxious or feeling depressed to like take a deep breath. But functionally what that's doing is it's hacking the normal response we have, which is our fight or flight system is going crazy. This is what, it's called our sympathetic nervous system is like kind of freaking out. But when you take a deep breath, like you can't be in fight or flight mode like some tiger is chasing you anymore because you're breathing too slowly. So you actually turn on the body's opposite system, your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system. You're like literally switching which system in your body is reacting just through taking a couple deep breaths. So that's kind of hacking your body, but a different one is really hacking your thought patterns. And I think this is one of the like biggest insights of cognitive behavior therapy is that even though it feels like we're our thoughts, we can control them. Like if you're on a like constant loop of beating yourself up all the time and talking to yourself badly, you can nip that drill instructor mode in the bud, right? You can just say, okay, fine. Thank you for telling me all these awful things about myself, but okay, never mind. I'm just not going to listen to them. Or you can give that evil voice a kind of silly name. I tell my students, these days, students have a lot of memes about Karen. They just really hate this name Karen, like the fun of Karen, And so I say, just call it Karen. Like, okay, Karen, yeah, I guess I'm sucking again and I'm not studying enough. Like, it just is this momentary break where you realize that's not me. It's not reality. It's just some, stupid Karen self-critical voice. Yeah. And so those are like hacks we can do to our bodies and our thought
that's
patterns.
The biggest, that got me. That one was the one that got me, that I tell people to help them, only because it almost took me down, where I was at a point where I thought I was going to get fired from a job. And it wasn't even that big a deal, but it was the only time in my life that I started doing math in my head at night and just playing those tapes. And I was walking with a semi-friend who said, you know what? You're firing yourself 3 times a night and it feels real. And if it happens, it's going to be bad. You probably feel bad, but you'll figure it out. But you're firing yourself every night 3 times, and it felt real. I was killing myself. So every time I start doing it, and it's very easy to be future thinking, and start the tapes, I catch myself because of that, and go try and get very present or do something present. But man, is that destructive! And I didn't realize how real it felt, that you really feel the same emotion as if something bad is happening.
And I have. People I'm very close to who are going through some cognitive behavioral therapy right now. And I loved an image that they shared where it's not about eliminating the thing that is plaguing you. It's not about eliminating the thing that's torturing you. They said, pretend it's in the theater. Right now it's sitting in the front row and that's all you see. He goes, it's not going to exit the theater, but put it in the back row. Put it in the back. And I love that image. So I want to circle back to something that I think I heard you say, because if you did, I'm fascinated by it. I think you said we're sometimes a little stymied about the idea of sharing our happiness or exempling our happiness. And I wonder about that because, I have a lot of friends who have not been as fortunate in life as I have been. I'm very aware of that. And when things are going well, I'm a little gun shy about sharing how happy I am that, I sometimes I've earned it, but sometimes it's just self-perpetuating because that's how my life has gone. And I feel like it's narcissistic or gloating or, I feel like I'm going to make them feel bad if I share with people I care about the things that are making me happy. Is there anything to that?
Yeah. I mean, there's actually an effect that's been studied by this Harvard psychologist, Dan Gilbert, about extraordinary experiences. We all think like, oh my gosh, I would love to be as famous as Jason Alexander. I would love to go to the moon. I would love to make, like $10 billion or something. But when people actually have those extraordinary experiences happen, it ends up being kind of lonely, right? There are very few people that will, you can kind of share this as like, hey, how cool it was. Like I was on Seinfeld, I get this podcast now, or like how cool it is and I'm so rich or got to go to the moon. And that means that in an odd way, the best circumstances we can imagine for ourselves wind up making us feel a little bit isolated, right? They wind up making us feel a little bit lonely because like other people can't relate. But that said, I think we also forget that, we can share those kinds of experiences with other people, right? If we take a moment to try to share those things, we don't feel as jerky as we think. There's kind of one caveat to this, which is like people don't like it as much when you kind of gloat and share about your material possessions, like that, like my car is so cool, or like, look at like my new like shoes or something. People don't care. But if you try to share your extraordinary experiences, that's actually fun for people because they can kind of engage with them a little bit socially. They can imagine imagine what it might be like to have them. They might have questions and so on. And so extraordinary experiences, we put them, up in this like, oh man, if only I could do X, Y, and Z. Might not be as good as we think because it might isolate us, but find ways to share them and share them a little bit more than you think, because people will often resonate, better than you expect them to. People will find something in your experience that they can relate to more than you expect.
Before we go, I got to hit you with the bigger issue, which is what comedian Drew Michaels says when people ask him about depression. He says depression equals seeing things for what they really are. Because he goes, really? You ask me what's wrong. Do you not Google the news? Do you not see what's going on in the world? It's a mess. How do you tell people with real world stuff that are, especially older people? I mean, there's so many people who are obsessed. They're sitting home, they're isolated, especially with COVID. They're watching CNN or Fox all day long on a loop, and they're fed whatever information that network, that channel, that streaming service is giving all day long, and it's impacting them.
And it's designed to agitate.
And it's designed to agitate because
it's
engagement, anger is better for engagement. Yes. So what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is where I think we need to get away from this idea of toxic positivity, right? Like true human flourishing doesn't mean that we're some Pollyanna pretending everything's perfect and unicorns and rainbows. Like it requires looking at what's really out there. And when you look at what's really out there, it's scary. Political polarization, the economy falling apart, climate change, pick your terrible thing that's happening in the world. But there's looking at that and just feeling so anxious that you can't do anything and not having strategies to do well. And there's looking at that and saying, the world has some bad stuff. These are normative emotions to feel a little scared, a little angry. What can I do to allow those emotions? What can I do to navigate them? Take a deep breath, get back in my senses, right? And there's evidence that strategy doesn't just make us feel good. It's kind of what we need if we're going to solve a lot of these yucky problems about the world too. There's evidence from Georgetown University that really looks at like, okay, who are the people that are trying to fix this stuff? Who's going out to a social justice protest, or who's trying to engage in some sort of climate action, installing solar panels or going to a protest or something. Like who's doing the stuff that's going to fix this? And what you find is it's the people who have the most positive emotion ahead of time, who are feeling most mentally healthy ahead of time, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? If you're so anxious about the climate, you're so anxious that you can't actually get your act together to install your solar panels. And I love this finding because it suggests it's not that we should ignore the problems of the world, right? If we really want to solve them, which, hopefully we do, especially my Yale students who are these smart young people that, all these problems are going to fall to, like you actually have to figure out ways that you can deal with your own mental health and develop strategies to kind of feel better, because that's going to be what causes you to take action to fix this stuff. So it's not that we should ignore this stuff. We should look at it head on, use the strategies we use to kind of navigate real normative, reasonable negative emotions, and then do the stuff we need to do to feel better so we can take action, to fix all this stuff.
Talking about fixing, I'm looking at quotes from colleagues of yours that I was just looking up what people have had to say about the pursuit of happiness. And there were two that are almost saying the same thing. One of your colleagues said, happiness isn't something you feel, it's something you do. Another one said, I advocate for the pursuit of a meaningful life rather than chasing happiness. One of the things I always talk to my sons about is if you spend a little less time, and I tell this to myself as well, a little less time concerned about, am I happy? Or what could I do to be happier? I go, you know what? You're not worried about your survival today. How about go out and do one thing for somebody else and then check in with your happiness meter?
Totally. And I think this is something we in our culture gets wrong, right? There's so much talk these days about like self-care. People are like, oh, do you talk about self-care in your class? Yeah. And then, an idea of treat yourself, right? Parks and recreation kind of got us on the wrong path because we think that happiness is all about me. But if you look at happy people, what you find is happy people are doing stuff for other people. Controlled for income, happy people are giving more of their money away than not so happy people, right? So I think we get this idea of self-care wrong. Like a really easy hack for our own self-happiness is to do something nice for other people to kind of get out of our headspace. And if people are listening right now and feeling depressed or kind of some of the nasty stuff we talked about is resonating, pick one thing you can do for somebody else. Text a friend, donate $5 to charity if you've got free $5, right? Just something you can do to get out of your own headspace and become a little bit more other oriented. The data suggests that will instantly start to make you feel better, and it'll create a positive feedback loop, hopefully, where you're doing more stuff for other people and starting to feel better and better. And then that's just great for everybody.
All right, so this is a somewhat personal question I have to ask you, and I'm self-reflecting. So as someone who is recognizable, generally when I'm out in public, the people that want to approach me are because there is at least a perceived understanding that we've had a shared experience that they have enjoyed and they're appreciative and they want to share their experience of something I've done with me. I cannot have a bad day. I can't go, hey, not right now. All right, I got something on my mind. You are now equated as being the guru of happiness. Can you have a bad day publicly?
Yeah, it's not as easy. I mean, luckily I'm not as recognizable as you.
Yeah, but still, you were giving a finger to somebody in the parking lot. It's not going to be a good visual.
Right.
No, there definitely are these moments where, I'll be in my residential college courtyard and I'll be like, storming through and get an annoying email and I'm walking and, one of my students will be like, "Hi, Professor Santos." And, they'll say like, "You didn't notice me because you were on your phone. You're not supposed to do that." So I get called out a lot when I'm not following these practices. And that's been great, right? Because it means like I kind of have to practice what I preach, right? And so it's not so much that I shouldn't have bad days, but I do have a lot of pressure to follow this stuff. As you said, I love that quote, that happiness isn't, what we're feeling, it's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that means that like, even if I'm having a bad day, I know there are hacks I can do to behave differently, right? And that's power. We're not all necessarily born feeling happy. I think what Peter was saying is right. Some of us are just we're prone to be depressed. We're prone to be a little anxious, but there are things that all of us can do to kind of hack that if we know the right strategies.
Well, I just wish that you could replicate your course and get it into elementary and middle school education, because it seems if we're waiting till college age to begin to look at these practices, we've probably waited far too long, especially nowadays.
Jason, I don't think this was actually a plug, but we actually have just put a version of our class online for free for high school students. We refilmed it in front of a group of high school students. It's called Science of Wellbeing for Teens. You can go on Coursera.org or YouTube and find it. And, if you have a teenager in your life that you're worried about, have them learn these strategies early. Then I won't have to teach it at Yale. I can teach them.
I love that.
Are you preparing
like
Even Happier or Being the Happiest? Are there new books coming out? You thought you were happy before. Wait until you're now.
Have you heard of ecstasy? Not that kind. Yeah, right, exactly.
What's the next course? How do you top this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think we go, younger and younger. We're starting up a new partnership with Sesame Street where we're trying to teach these strategies, to little kids. And I think you might say like, oh my gosh, we got to, share these strategies with little kids. But like, honestly, I wish as a 3-year-old, I had learned the strategy of like, when I'm feeling frustrated, take a deep breath. Or when I'm feeling really anxious, like, oh, what do I see? Like these are things we can be teaching kids.
I just got to wrap my head around getting up and watching Ernie go, I'm so down. I am so down today. Snuffleupagus.
Well, you had Oscar the Grouch.
Bert Snuffleupagus is such an ass. It's like, what are you doing?
Oh, sorry, Bert. Let's do something nice for someone else.
Well, I'm depressed because of you. I can't even own my own place. I have to share rent. It's been 38 years. I've been on TV. I can't have my own place. I don't have a car. I don't even have opposable thumbs.
And Sesame Street hasn't given me a raise in 42 years.
And Big Bird's getting more. I looked at the paychecks.
Big Bird is
a lot more money than me. And what's he doing?
Well, he's got one arm in the air.
And Oscar has to live in a trash can 35 years. What's going on here?
You got it relatively
That's
easy.
Wonderful. Lots of success because we need it. We need it to be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for your work, and please, spread it earlier, younger, and everywhere. It's. And
you're in Yale. You're at Yale. That's pretty impressive. I was not even allowed on the campus. My God. Yeah. What does that look like? Is it moss covered? Is it pretty?
It's very pretty. I have to tell you.
If you saw my SAT scores, I'm not even allowed in Boston. I'm not allowed near Harvard. I'm not no Ivy League for me.
I got you.
Thank you. Thanks for doing what you're
Dr.
doing.
Laurie Santos, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And much happiness to you.
Are you happy, by the way? We didn't even ask you that. Are you really, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're about a what, 8?
I'm like about a 7, 8 out of 10. And I
did you
used
start
to be more like a 6 out of 10. So
did you start before the interview at a 10 and we took you to a 6 or what? Yeah, she's not saying.
This wonderful social connection has only been pleasant.
Seriously, that was a fantastic conversation. Fascinating. I'm happier just from chatting with her.
You know what? I want you to be my joy contributor.
I want you to be my beautiful mess.
Listening now or watching now, how much do you think this has moved the cheese for me and Jason? You know what? We are pretty happy and we joke about it. But yeah, I do. You know that I deal with depression all the time and have to fight through it, and we talk, and we're honest about it. We're close enough that we talk about. I think that's, and I say this not to be syrupy and cause people to get diabetes. But one of the nice things when you say best friends is we've been through just about everything, literally just about everything together. Birth, death, illnesses, stuff, and unconditionally always, it's that. So this is
well, you and I have that that very rare relationship where I actually can be completely who I am with you. I can tell you about the things that scare me, that elate me, that would seem boastful if I talked to anybody else about.
I've seen you scared, which amazes me. I've seen you, and this show's supposed to be funny and ha-ha and jokes, and I'm thinking, do we close with funny? Where do we go? And I thought, this is more important than that, in the sense that so many people are suffering. So many people, and Jay, I even just bring it up now, I could lose it again. I'm watching this thing on TV, and a guy is talking about his who was it? God, I wish I remembered, because it would make it even more, somebody well-known who was talking about their struggle, and I start crying. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying not to let my wife see it. And she looks at me and says, what? And I said, I hold it in. I don't talk about that a lot. Yeah. Because I kind of got to keep it in to be there for other people and all that stuff. But I didn't realize how it would it just blindsided me, man, that that the pain is out there that people experience. And you and I try and do a lot of stuff, a lot of charity stuff, and help people because you can, and it's not that hard. But man, a lot of people are hurting, and I didn't realize to the extent that I was in a situation at that moment. But it's the same thing with you. I can tell you anything, we can share anything, and then the magic is that we get to share.
And the other thing I do want to say to our audience, our listeners, and I'll use myself as an example, although I'm sure I'm not the best example. But we are aware of people when we imagine them some sort of idealized life. They've got to be happy. They've got A, B, C, D, E, and F going. And I know lots of people who are very successful. Success and happiness are not equivalent. And in fact, I think you did some research about some of the happiest people in the world are
the most miserable people in the world because they're striving so hard. It's upside.
They just don't have.
Well, you know what?
Much,
the world's happiest guy is a 76-year-old Buddhist. Laurie, we should go after him. 76-year-old Buddhist monk, who is, and everybody listening going, how do you know he's the happiest? His name is Matau Ricard. He gained a PhD in molecular genetics. He changed his path from science to become a Buddhist monk. They attached 256 sensors to his skull and discovered his brain produced gamma waves linked to consciousness, attention, learning, and memory while meditating at levels they had never seen before. And there's a thing about him on Netflix. You can watch it. And it's really interesting. If you're willing to go there for happiness, you can go there by giving up stuff. A lot of people, look, in society, we collect stuff, we buy stuff, we race to do stuff. It's all the stuff. My biggest shocker was I came out here from Philadelphia, born in Philly in a row home, moved out here, and I'm working on I don't want to say which lot, a studio lot. I'd never been on a studio lot before, and I'm walking to the show that I'm working on. And I'm passing a car, I won't say the car either, with the star of another show of a huge series, sitcom. And it's show night. And he's crying his eyes out and his shoulders are heaving. And I get to our set and I go, what's that about? And he goes, oh, every show night, he's depressive. And he breaks down because he doesn't think he's good enough. I said, but it's a giant, it doesn't matter.
Right.
He's breaking down. Another person I know, a billionaire from a prominent family. Yeah. Completely depressed. Goes through a lot of stuff as far as identity, am I real, the inherited, how do people look at me, I'm a fraud. It's fascinating when you see what goes on in other people, when you get a glimpse of somebody that you thought you want to be like. My dad always used to say, I'd see a Rolls Royce drive by, this is more a wealth thing, and I'd say, oh God, I want to be that guy. And he goes, the car behind him might be there to repossess that Rolls Royce. So don't wish that you're anybody else. The same with happiness.
And I remember my mom saying, God rest her, my mother's big thing was always to me about live a life of service. She was a nurse and nurse educator all her life. And she really wanted me to just live a life of service. And I find the more and more that I try and do that and preach that and be a part of that, it is true. When you end your day going, I don't know if I am a better person today, but I made
somebody
good moments for somebody else or a couple of other people, and you go, I've earned my rest tonight. And then the gratitude of it all. The thing I tell my wife Dana almost every night, we get into bed. I'm tired. It's a good tired, and I get into bed and I go, I can't believe I get to lie down with you at night in a house that feels safe and secure in a warm, comfortable bed. Not everybody has this. This is great. This is really great.
God, I should start saying that because I get to
and then
bed.
I think about you and me, and then I get anxious again.
Yeah, and I get into bed and I say, we need a bed. We need a new bed. Like Jason has a
Why don't we
gratitude
paint
bed.
the ceiling that color?
And you know what else? You know what else? I realize, even with all of this, the lesson's still, I'm still resisting. I'll be happy with contentment.
Yeah.
Happiness is still a goal.
Yeah,
It's like, it's Everest.
yeah,
I'm climbing, like,
right.
I don't need to climb all the peaks.
Sure.
Contentment.
Yeah.
Contentment. There's a
Yeah.
certain amount of...
I'm not vomiting in my own mouth right now.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a certain level of disappointment that I'm
Sure.
okay with. I'll handle it. It's just, I'm okay. Google
David
Heim.
Guggenheim, what did we learn today?
We were inquiring about how much it might cost to go to Yale 100
Yes,
years ago.
300 years ago.
Well, 300 years ago, it's a little bit hard to determine because tuition was often paid in the form of goods and services.
I was going to just, as you were saying that, I was going to say it's a duck and a cracker.
Two chickens and a tooth pull.
Gets into
There you go.
Wow.
I believe-
it's up to
I
two
believe,
chickens in Ivy League school.
And don't forget the beaver anal glands because everybody loves vanilla.
Oh, sure.
Wow, you squeezed that in.
big
You
call
squeezed
back.
the
There you
lands
go.
and the
There you
beaver.
go.
That was a deep cut in the Really No Really podcast.
Wow, saluting
But,
you.
As of 1939,
Yes.
which is basically where the records go back to, it was $900 in real 1939 dollars, which adjusted for inflation was $15,000 a year. And just for comparison, in 2015, the tuition was $6,200.
And
per
don't
year.
I know it?
Well, and that's not even to mention room and board, which
Yeah.
was another duck and a possum.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Exactly.
And some pudding.
And take my shirts in.
By the way, I wonder too if donors, if they would give you like here's an ox and a cow. I want my name on the building. The Tilden building. Is that it, David Guggenheim?
That is it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, that's enough.
Then let us say thank you to Dr. Laurie Santos for being here today. Thank you, our producer, Laurie Crimmy, David Guggenheim. If you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and like. If you want to contact us, reallynoreally.com is our website. And we drop new episodes every Tuesday on the iHeart app,
Yes, we
the
do.
Apple app, or wherever you get your podcast. This was a good one. I'm happy.
I'm happier.
That's good enough.
It is good enough. See ya.